So I think God exists. By God, I'm talking about a perfect being, unlimited in power, knowledge, and goodness, who created the universe. Uh, um, and so, okay, why do I think this? Well, I think it for the same reason I think lots of facts about history or chemistry and so on, where I think God's existence explains lots of things that we already know about. So the reason, for instance, that I believe that Julius Caesar existed is because Julius Caesar's existence explains all the writing about him and so on and so forth. I think that the existence of God explains lots of facts about the world. So what facts does it explain? Well, it explains that there's a physical world at all. That's more strongly predicted if there's a God than if there's not a God, because if God wants to make physical, embodied, conscious agents on the grounds that they're a good thing, then he needs a physical world to make that. So it's at least not that unlikely that there'd be a physical world. In contrast, if there's no God, it's much less likely that there'd be a physical world. It explains why there are laws at all. It explains why the laws are applicable, right? So it explains why the laws that exist happen to apply to the things that exist. You could imagine that not happening, right? So you could imagine there are laws of the form, all Y's do something, but there are only X's. So the stuff just sits around dormant, doing nothing forever. It requires that the laws are capable of producing complex structures, right? So you could just have laws where the things just move in a straight line or in a circle or don't do anything or, just follow some very boring path. But those aren't the laws we have. We have laws that give rise to these very, very rich, complex structures that are capable of forming them. We have finely tuned constants on top of that. So we have constants that if you tweak them even very slightly, that fall in this extremely narrow range that's necessary to give rise to complex structures. If they were different by even a very, very small amount out of the whole range of possible values they could take on, then no complex structures would form. So all these things are very improbable if there is no God. But much more likely if there's a God who wants to create them, especially given just how narrow the range is, right? If there's no God, you could get any value of the cosmological constant. And so it's super unlikely that you'd happen to have it take on one of the astronomically small number of values where it gives rise to interesting and complex structures. Then on top of that, you have, I think God is the best explanation of why, even after you have that, you need more stuff in order to get conscious agents like us. First of all, you need for certain physical structures to give rise to consciousness, which is at least surprising on if there's no God. If there's a God, you'd expect at least, the physical structures to give rise to consciousness. And if there are physical structures like that, for those physical structures to arise. If there is a God, you wouldn't expect that. And then finally, they have to be capable of giving rise to this complex, rich consciousness that interacts with the physical world. And so as a result, I think the fact that all these things happen is strong evidence for the existence of God. These aren't the only reasons to believe in the existence of God. There happen to be quite a lot of other arguments I like, but that I think are successful, and maybe we can talk about some of those if we're seeing how God compares to other sort of similar to theist hypotheses. But I think at least these are enough to establish that the probability that God exists is a lot higher than it would otherwise be. And then I think that unless you start out with a super low prior in God existing, you should think God probably exists, but then you shouldn't start with a low prior because God is very simple. God, theism is just the idea that there's this fully unlimited mind, right? It's a very simple hypothesis, just one fundamental thing without limits. So yeah, for that reason, God exists.
Over to TJump.
All right, so let's. The first thing you said is that the God hypothesis explains lots of things. That is not good evidence to believe anything, because any hypothesis can post hoc explain literally all of the data. It's the problem of underdetermination. So the ability to explain lots of things is not a good reason to believe anything. You can say magic farting leprechauns created the universe 5 seconds ago, and that would explain all facts that we see and believe. That would not make that a good reason to believe magic farting leprechauns exist. So what we're interested in is, when we look for evidence, is something that indicates your hypothesis more so than the leading competitive hypothesis. In this case, would be like naturalism or something. And so you brought up the fine-tuning argument, and you said that if God existed, we would expect to see certain kinds of fine-tuning that under naturalism we would find unexpected, something along those lines. That is false. So that assumes a particular type of theism and a general type of naturalism or atheism. So like if you assume a particular type of God who likes to create humans or whatever, then a universe with humans would be more expected under that particular type of God. Now, if you think of an alternative type of God, a God who only likes puppies or only likes black holes or only likes nothingness, then every possible type of universe has an equal probability as a universe with humans, and it's no more expected that you would find constants that would be designed for humans than it would be literal nothingness. And on the naturalist side, when you say it is unexpected on naturalism or atheism, you're taking the general kind of atheism where there are no predetermined or values that would have been selected for more so than other values. If we pick a particular kind of naturalism atheism, for example, like naturalistic pantheism or whatever, it has a particular set of constants that are within its nature, then whatever those constants would prioritize would be more likely than a different kind of atheism naturalism with a different set of particular constants that it prioritizes. And so when we compare a particular kind of atheism to a particular kind of theism, the probabilities are exactly the same, 1-to-1, because both models have a particular nature to prioritize a particular thing existing. If we compare general theism to general atheism, there is no increase in probability one way or the other. They both have exactly the same probabilities for selecting a universe with life as one without life. And so there's no reason to think that because we see a universe as we see it, regardless of what we would see, to prioritize one over the other.
Okay, so should we go into open discussion?
Sounds good.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, so you say because any hypothesis can explain the data, explaining the data doesn't favor one hypothesis. Do you agree that some fact favors a hypothesis if the probability of the fact conditional on the hypothesis is higher than the probability on the fact conditional on the falsity of the hypothesis?
Depends. In some cases, yes. In some cases, no.
In what cases would that not be true?
So, for example, I can post hoc make up a hypothesis that would entail all of the facts I see, and they're like required. So, like, if any of these are all of these facts are required for the existence of my hypothesis, and then I can compare that to something that makes predictions, say evolution or whatever. Evolution doesn't require all of these things to exist. There's other ways it could be happen. So it's not really a conditional that everything we see must have happened this way for evolution to be true. It's just a coincidence. And evolution is still true. My hypothesis is false. Making it conditional is just irrelevant. We don't care. It doesn't matter if it's necessary or
Right.
preconditional.
So in that case, I would say that the probability. So if your hypothesis is like, that there's like a genie who rigged all the evidence so that it appears that it corresponds with all the facts that are predicted on evolution, I agree that that would explain the data. But I would just say that that theory has just such a low prior probability because that theory, the prior probability of that theory is the prior probability that there's a genie at all, and then multiplied by the probability that if there was a genie, they would do all those specific things. So it doesn't at all raise the overall probability.
No. So that wouldn't be, that would be a straw man. So in this case, that would be the nature of the
How is
genie
it a straw man? I haven't even represented your position.
Stop. So in this case, it would be like the nature of the genie was necessary so that it would necessarily do all of the things we see. And so this is the most likely outcome, is that all of the things we see are exactly what would have happened because it's the nature of the genie. So it's not just random. And it's
right.
The nature of this genie must necessarily, because it's the oneness of the genie. So it only has one part. And its one partness is necessarily would create everything we see as we see it. And if we compare that to the hypothesis of evolution, that's still just a stupid hypothesis. I can post hoc rationalize anything to make it seem like there's just one magic property that would necessarily produce everything we see, and compare that to something like evolution. It's just garbage. It's not evidence at all. What we need is novel predictions. Evolution provides those, and so the novel predictions of evolution completely trounces any kinds of prior probability, and prior probability doesn't apply to anything new hypotheses. It only applies to past hypotheses anyway.
Okay, well, so so what I was saying was that in that case, I think that the prior probability of that very specific hypothesis would be very low, but that hypothesis, it would actually go up in probability as a lot because of the evidence, but just because its prior is so low, it would still have a very, very low probability. But I don't agree with your idea that the only reason why we believe things is on the basis of making novel, testable predictions. I mean, if we apply that consistently, we would throw out nearly all of the historical sciences, right? So, the way we know that Julius Caesar existed in history is not that people made a novel, testable prediction and then did a scientific experiment and concluded that he existed. It's that it explains facts, like the writing about him.
No, that is incorrect. So, historical evidence, there was a paper on this by Mike Licona on historians and miracle claims, et cetera, something. And historical claims are only justifiable when they are of things that have made testable predictions. So Julius Caesar, human. Humans have testable predictions. Perfectly fine to make claims about him and believe them based off of testimony or writing. In the case of miracles, magic, mythical creatures, paranormal, supernatural, UFOs, those are disregarded in history and in law because they must be demonstrated to exist empirically via novel predictions before they are accepted. And so in the case of both the entire field of history and the entire field of law, novel predictions is the standard something must meet before it is an acceptable puzzle piece to use in a hypothesis. And then after you show that class, humans, whatever, then you can extrapolate to individuals like Julius Caesar via testimony. That part doesn't matter. But you can never use testimony or historical claims for anything that doesn't have an empirical basis, like miracles, magic.
Okay,
God.
so I'm very confident that you're misrepresenting what Licona said, given that Licona is a Christian who's written multiple books where he argues from the historical evidence to the resurrection of Jesus. Right, so he clearly thinks that you
stop. So this argument wasn't about what Licona said. Licona was presenting the opposite view. He was arguing against the consensus in the field. The consensus in the field is what I was representing. So I wasn't representing Licona. I was representing.
Licona says it's the consensus in the field. Can you tell me where does Licona say
the very first sentence of the paper? I think it's like the most or the something historians in the field hold to it that the study of miracle claims lies outside of the bound of historian acting in their professional capacity. Something. Here are the reasons why. Like the very first sentence of the paper.
Okay, well, what he said is most biblical. Okay, so I just pulled up the paper. And maybe we are getting slightly sidetracked, but he says most biblical scholars and historians hold that investigation of a miracle report lies outside of the rights of historians acting within their professional capacity. Right, so he's not saying that it can't be reasonable to conclude it based on historical evidence. All that he's saying is that that's not in their role as historians.
Oh my god!
Just like if you conclude theism on the basis of fine-tuning evidence, just like if you conclude theism can I finish? Let me just finish my explanation, and then you can go on.
No.
If you conclude
theism, stop talking.
Sorry, I was not.
I don't care. So, as I have used this paper many, many times, if you continue reading the paper, the whole point Licona is expressing here is why. Why do they do this? That sentence does not express why. It just expresses the position. They do not accept this. Then he references big, long quotes from other people about the methodology of history, which if you read, will express the exact same thing I just said. If it doesn't have an empirical basis, you can't use it in history. That's the simple way to say it. So this is the conclusion. I don't care if you agree. If you don't, you can leave. You're wrong. Stop wasting my time. This is just the facts. And you can talk to historians. I've talked to many who have literally said this and agreed with me. It's not up for debate. Historians hold to it that the study of miracle claims, the first sentence is correct by the consensus. Licona agrees this is the consensus. And the reason is history and law do not accept testimony for things that don't have an empirical basis. This is an indisputable fact. If you don't agree, don't waste my time. This is just a fact of history and a fact of law. Now, once you get past that fact, then what's your argument?
Okay, well, so I don't agree with your reading of Licona.
Do not care. Don't bring up that topic. Get past that. Say that's a fact. You don't get to disagree. Now, what's your argument?
Well, I would encourage people to read the paper because I have looked at this paper before, and his point is that it's not true in their role as historians that they do that, but nonetheless, it can still, they think that it's just outside their purview of history because history is method.
Yeah, I'm not interested in your interpretation. Your interpretation is wrong. I do not care. I know Licona is arguing for historical miracles. I don't care. This is the consensus in the field. Whether you agree or not, I don't care. What is your argument related to the debate topic?
Well, it'll be harder to hear if you keep muting me. But anyways,
that's why I do it. Yes.
Yeah. So
what is your argument related to the debate topic?
So I think it can be reasonable to believe things on the basis of things explaining facts. Now, your response to that was that you were said, well, we only believe it on the basis of it having some previous empirical basis, right? So the only reason why we think that it's reasonable to accept to accept certain particular historical claims is because we already have empirical basis for people. And then we use the things that are in the category of people to explain the data. Now, it's true that we have evidence for people, but we don't have empirical evidence for Julius Caesar. What we have is testimony that's more strongly predicted on the hypothesis that exists. Now, we have empirical evidence for a set of things containing Julius Caesar, but we also have that for God, right? So you can similarly say we have observed things, and then so then we've observed things. God is a thing, and so we already have an implicit empirical of God, and so then it makes sense to believe in God. I think it's just an arbitrarily constructed categories to rule out concluding that God exists on the basis of explaining facts about the world. And it's hard to see in probabilistic terms why it wouldn't be right. If the way that you update on evidence is just you look at the prior probability of the evidence, and then you look at how much more times more likely the facts of the world are if the evidence is true than if it's false, then that just would be able to vindicate supernatural claims as long as there's enough evidence for them. And in this case, there is, because the probability of finely tuned constants is so astronomically low.
So one, no, I already addressed the finely tuned constants. There's no difference in probabilities between that of a God hypothesis or naturalist hypothesis. But first,
I can address
prior
that.
probabilities. Yes, we will. That is probably going to be the key point. The first thing, prior probabilities are garbage. They don't apply for the same reasons as historical testimony and law testimony. And it's not that God is a thing; it's that anything that has properties that lack any empirical basis, like magic, miracles, mythical creatures, supernatural powers, any of those things would require justification. Having one such property, like it exists, would be analogous. So you could say, a thing that exists was seen by testimony. 100% agree. But a thing that exists that has magic powers, because you have added a property that lacks an empirical basis, now you've left the realm of what can be justified via testimony. You can only use things that all of the properties that consisted of already have an empirical basis. Existence is one of those for God, but the other ones are not. Outside of space-time, singularities, simplicity, all that garbage has not been demonstrated empirically, and so that would not be justifiable via testimony. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, so I don't think that it's true. So what you were suggesting wasn't about testimony. What you were suggesting was that in order to believe in something that doesn't have an empirical basis, we need it needs to make novel testable predictions. And so I was disagreeing with that. Now you say, well, and I was giving the example of Julius Caesar. Now you disagreed and you say, well, we do have an empirical basis for Julius Caesar because we have empirical basis for humans. And saying, well, humans are a category that Julius Caesar's part of, but we don't have testable predictions made based on Julius Caesar in particular existing. All we have is empirical evidence based on the category of things existing, right? So similarly, in the case of God, we have empirical evidence for for things existing. God is a thing, and so even though we don't have novel testable predictions made from God existing, we have novel testable predictions from the category existing. Now, next, you suggested that what we need is empirical evidence for it having the property for it having that property. Well, we don't have any empirical evidence for that in the case of Julius Caesar because we have no novel testable predictions made on the notion that something being has the property of being Julius Caesar. So I think it's perfectly analogous in both cases.
Okay, so there is no property of being Julius Caesar. That's not a thing. All the things that make up Julius Caesar, his cells, his matter, his energy, are all things that have been demonstrated to exist. There's no property of Julius Caesar has ever been claimed to exist by anyone.
Wait, sorry, you don't think Julius Caesar has the property of being Julius Caesar?
No, there's no such property. There is a label that we use that we made up in words that we call a property, but there's no such property that actually exists independent of our imagination. No.
Okay. Well, then I can say the same thing about God. I can say, okay, God doesn't have the property of being God because there are properties are made up words and labels.
Does he have the property of being outside of space-time?
Yeah. Does Julius Caesar have the property of being the leader of Rome?
No, that's not a property. So again, that part
Being
is nothing
okay,
that
so then
makes him.
God doesn't have the property of being outside of space time. If Julius Caesar doesn't have the property of being emperor of Rome, if you deny that there are properties, then of course God doesn't have.
No, I
No,
don't deny
I think
that
there
there
are
are
properties.
properties. Properties are labels of things that exist. There are conceptual labels like I think someone's tall. That's not a property. That's not a property in reality. That's a subjective thing I've made up. Now, if you're claiming there's some ontological fact like being outside of space-time, that is something that is a fact of reality, not a fact of my mind. I'm not labeling it as such. It is a fact that this thing does not have any of the physical constants of space and time in it, essentially.
Okay, is it a
the
fact
thing.
of reality that Julius Caesar was the emperor of Rome?
Subjective social construct, not a part of what makes him. No, don't care
Okay,
about that.
it's not a fact of reality. So why is it a fact of
I don't care
reality?
about any of the social construct facts. I care about his ontology of what makes him exist. All of his existence facts. He
Okay,
is made of
so
only natural things that have already been demonstrated to exist. I don't care about his social relations. I don't care about his conceptual leanings. I don't care about how tall he is. These don't apply to God. This is clearly not even close to analogous to the silly Garbo stuff that is claimed of God outside of space time, singularity, simplicity, infinitely powerful. All of this garbage is stuff that has some kind of ontological essence. It is an existing thing that can do stuff. It's not a label we made up. This stuff has no empirical basis. Therefore, this stuff is stupid to believe based off of priors or testimony. And the reason I brought up
so we're not talking. Oh, sorry.
testimony was
I think Tom, you're
history.
breaking up.
History for Judy. So
Yeah, you're kind of
Tom,
roboting.
you're
Tom.
breaking up, buddy.
it is
You there, Tom? Oh, okay. He'll be back.
We lost Tom.
He'll be back.
Hey.
So
Okay,
that's better.
so in both cases, what we've observed is
I got a
so
thing on the like
right. So in both cases, there's a broad category of things that we have empirical evidence for, and we don't have any empirical evidence in the sense of novel testable predictions for specific instances of the thing, right? So we don't have any empirical evidence we don't have any novel testable predictions made on the basis of it being that way. Now you said, well, but the difference is that it has properties. So, but then you were saying, well, but properties aren't really real. So I'm just saying, if the properties aren't really real, and then you think that having property, that properties are just a description of the way things are, then I would just say the same thing about God, that God doesn't have those properties either, and so it's not some thing that we're thinking God has on the basis of not having actual
cutting it
evidence.
out.
So
I can't
whatever
hear
you
you.
say about the Caesar case will apply to the God case.
Hey Frank, is he
Yeah, Tom,
cutting
you've
in and out
been
for you?
Tom, you've been the one cutting out a lot, buddy. I'm not sure if you
Okay,
can
yeah,
fix
I
your
think I have like
Wi-Fi.
a bad connection or something. All right. Is it a little bit better now?
Yeah, you're coming through
Testing.
clear.
Is it better now?
Better now? Yeah.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. All right. So, in the case of Julius Caesar, all the properties that make up the essence of Julius Caesar are things that have been demonstrated to exist empirically: cells, matter, skin, humans, bones, lungs, hearts, all things that we can demonstrate exist. This is not true for the case of God. All the things that make up God have not ever been demonstrated to exist. There are some analogous things like consciousness, existence, those things. Outside of space and time, nope. All powerful, nope.
So I
Can
don't
create
think.
universes, nope. So there's no. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. So I don't know if those are part of the essence of God, but it's not true that all the things that are part of the essence of Julius Caesar we've had evidence for, right? Because so the essence of something is what's needed to be that thing, right? The essence of being me is what's needed for something to be
Nope.
me.
I'm just talking about physically, just as physical properties from a naturalist perspective. I don't care about the essence.
You were the one who
existence, none of this
invoked
garbage. This
you
is a
were the
very,
one who
very
invoked
naturalistic
mysterious essence
argument.
talk. But so if you're not talking, so you're saying
Yes,
all
but
the
your word of essence, your usage is not all usages. I'm using the word in the naturalistic sense. The
okay. So can
essence
you explain what you mean by
physically of
essence?
Julius Caesar is just cells. Just
Uh,
physically, just
can you
literally
explain
what I
what
just
you mean
said.
by
Physically,
essence?
naturally, what as Julius Caesar, I literally was just answering that question. Don't interrupt. Physically, essence is the things that physically make up the individual. Require that individual to exist is just matter, energy, DNA, skin, bones, lungs, heart. Just the physical parts of a human, nothing else. There are no properties outside of things that have already been demonstrated to exist, empirical predictions entailed in Julius Caesar. Not a single one. Indisputable.
Okay, so the idea is that your claim is that it's unreasonable to believe on something on the basis of except on the basis of novel testable predictions, unless we have novel testable predictions from the things that are that compose it, right? So from the things that you combine together to get the thing.
Sure, that is a good summary of if all of the parts of the things have been demonstrated to exist via novel prediction, then it is in the realm of not stupid to believe based off of testimony or conceptual evidence like testimony.
Okay, and why should we accept this principle?
Because of the consensus of history and the consensus of law and the consensus of every academic field that uses the basis of testimony as a basis of evidence, uses the standard as a way to eliminate garbage evidence, such as things human minds make up that have no basis in reality.
Okay. So
So,
your
or
claim is that
maybe
we
a better
shouldn't
way to
think.
phrase that would be a better way to phrase that would be is humans mind make up a lot of shit, and every academic field that uses human testimony as evidence has realized that the best way to filter out the garbage that human minds make up is to make a limit that it's not allowed to justify things that haven't been empirically demonstrated to exist. So miracles, magic, mythical creatures, paranormal, supernatural, UFOs,
Okay,
they're all out.
so okay. I mean, well, there are several ways we could go here. So one thing is, I mean, so I don't. It it may be that historians. So I disagree with your claim about what the historical consensus is. But most historians, I don't think that most historians should thinking something tells us very much about a philosophical question in philosophy of science, right? So the fact that most historians don't invoke leprechauns to explain historical phenomena doesn't tell us anything about whether God is the best explanation of fine tuning. And in particular, I agree that historians shouldn't be constantly invoking leprechauns to explain phenomenon, because I think whether miracles ever suffice is largely a philosophical question. It's outside their purview as historians, and that as we've observed from the world, there isn't some deity popping around constantly doing miracles, and so your prior probability in some particular miracle should be low, right? But if we're using it to explain the universe, that's different from the sort of anthropomorphic deity that's popping around randomly doing miracles. I mean, the other question: so on what grounds do you think anything existed, say prior more than 5 billion years ago?
I don't understand the question because it made novel predictions.
So we've now made novel predictions on the grounds that things more than 5 billion years ago existed. So
Yes.
if all the people who were experimenting, they just had the belief that basically the world popped into being 5 billion years ago, kind of fully formed, in a state where it looked at the time about 8 billion years ago old, but really it was just a minute old at the first moment. If they had done that, then you think it would be reasonable to think that the universe is only 5 billion years old?
I don't understand the question.
So suppose that. So you say that the reason it makes sense to believe that the universe is more than 5 billion years old is that people have made novel testable predictions on that assumption. So imagine that while the people were doing the experiments, they were doing it on the assumption that really the universe is only 5 billion years old, but it looks older, right? So it was made 5 billion years ago, looking about 8 billion years old, or 8.8 to be more exact. If they'd done that, then you think it would be reasonable to believe that the universe is only 5 billion years old and was created looking 8.8 billion years old?
Possibly. So, like, if all humans had an alternative hypothesis that was able to make all of the predictions that led us to the scientific progress, would it be rational to believe that alternative hypothesis? Yes.
Right. So even if there was suppose suppose that Einstein, when he formulated his theory of general relativity, he said, the theory of general relativity is true on account of the square circle in my pocket that's turquoise and colorless. If that had been his theory, would it be reasonable to think that there was a colorless turquoise square circle in his pocket that explains this?
If it made novel testable predictions that were consistent and successful, then yes.
Okay, so if just that had been Einstein's theory, and then it made all the right predictions, then you would believe that there is that Einstein used to have a turquoise colorless square circle in his pocket.
Yeah, any hypothesis that is
that's
successfully able to make successful predictions is rational to believe, yes.
And why do you think that?
Because if it's able to predict the future, that's what pretty much no other hypothesis ever can do successfully. And so if anything can do that, you're rational to believe it. So, like, let's say a magic sky daddy wrote a book, and the book makes predictions about the future, like, I don't know, raining from the sky, or magic dragons, or chips in our arms. If all of this stuff actually happened as it said it in the book, the people who read the book would be justified in believing there was a magic sky daddy. That would be a rational conclusion. It is logically justifiable to believe that. Yes. Could it be wrong? Yes, it could be wrong. Are they justified in believing that? Does that increase the probability that the proposition that the God exists is true? Yes, that is a rational thing to do. If you have a magic 8-ball that you shake and it just tells you the lottery numbers every single time, and is it rational to believe that it's a magic 8-ball, like a literally magic 8-ball? Yes, that is an actual thing. Could it just be random chance? 100%. Would you be logically justified in concluding that it was magic? Yes, because it can predict the future accurately, which is extremely hard. Making up high prior probabilities is extremely easy. It's just called making shit up. You can do that real easy. It is not easy to predict the future. It is extremely difficult. So any hypothesis, no matter how silly, like our square circle, something that's a logical contradiction, that can predict the future, is better than all hypotheses that have any prior probability of any numbers ever for any reason.
I certainly agree that predicting the future is an advantage of a theory, right? Because that means that it's consistent with the data, and if you predict the future, like, it's easy to ad hoc think things, explain things after the fact, but be wrong about them. But so I agree that's generally a virtue of a theory. But I don't think that automatically makes it worth accepting. If there are two theories that make identical predictions, it doesn't matter what was going on in the heads of the scientists as they were doing those experiments. And you haven't given an argument to think that it does matter. You've just asserted it. It's true. The fact that most false theories don't make novel testable predictions doesn't tell that if a theory makes novel testable predictions, it's probably the true theory, or that it's reasonable to believe. So I have no idea why anyone would believe that, and it seems just obviously false. Like, I mean, it just seems clear that even if Einstein believed that general relativity was true because of the purple colorless square circle in his pocket, if that had happened, it still wouldn't be reasonable to believe that that there was a colorless square circle in his pocket. Now, if you have an argument for that, I'd be curious to hear the argument.
I literally just gave it, so this is really trivial and pretty well established. So, what?
I didn't get the argument. Maybe it would be helpful if you put it into, like, premises or something.
If we had a book fall from the sky, let's say it's called, like, I don't know, the Bible, and the Bible said DNA is a double helix. The world was created 13.8 billion years ago. This will happen this year. Donald Trump will be president, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of facts. Would you be rationally justified in believing in God?
Yeah. I think you're rationally justified even if you don't have that. But I agree, that would raise the probability of God existing. So how does that entail?
Let's switch it from God to round square in your pocket. Would you be rationally justified in believing there's a round square in your pocket that did all these things?
No.
That's massive hypocrisy, but okay.
Sorry, how is it massively hypocritical? I think whether it's reasonable to believe something in part depends on the prior probability. So the hypothesis that, for instance, either God's providing genuine revelation and pretending to be a square circle to troll is likely, or is likelier, or the probability that maybe God there's a demon deceiving you. All those are way more likely than there being a colorless square circle providing revelation. So I agree, making testable predictions raises the probability of a hypothesis, but it doesn't automatically make it rational to believe. And you haven't given any, well, you've just asserted cases as if they're obvious, which it seems not at all obvious. And even if it is obvious, like in those cases, that doesn't imply that making novel testable prediction automatically makes a theory reasonable to believe. And I think we have plenty of good reason to think it doesn't make a theory reasonable to believe. The other question is, so if your view is that the way that we come to acquire knowledge is by correctly making novel testable predictions, how do you know that we've ever in the past made novel testable predictions rather than just hallucinating? I can answer that, which is I think that the hallucination hypothesis has a low prior. It requires greater complexity. It's worse on anthropic grounds. It fits with our experience poorly in all sorts of ways. But if you think that prior probabilities are made up bullshit, then it's very unclear how we are confident that in the past, when I have a memory of making a novel testable prediction, let's say based on a hypothesis, but how do I know that really happened?
Because I can make novel predictions right now based off of it. So yeah, I can make a novel prediction that if my hypothesis is correct, I can do a Google search and find out that, I don't know, there's facts that support that the world is 4.8 billion years old. Say I'm a kid and I don't know this. I can do a Google search, which I've never done before, and find out, oh, look, there are the facts. I was right. My hypothesis was correct. So we make novel predictions all the time from every single.
Okay, but so pre-Googling, so at this moment, you haven't just made any novel testable predictions based on the fact that and after you Google it. Oh, you think you made a novel testable prediction? Well, how do you know that you actually did the Googling?
I do make more novel predictions. Very simple. Like none of that is hard. None of that.
No, and then after you make those novel predictions, you won't know in that case that you did the Googling. Right? The more novel predict, what happens is you make a novel prediction and then you do a thing and observe that the prediction came true. But then the question is, but how do you know you actually made the prediction?
I just did it.
But how do you know that you just did it rather than the universe having been created?
I literally just did it. That's good. So it's like, let's say you impart false memories in my brain of me making novel predictions. I would be justified in believing whatever the hypothesis was that made those predictions. Let's say alien goes in my brain and says, I'm going to give you lots of false memories of making tons of predictions based off of the colorless round square. I'd be justified in believing the colorless round square. There's nothing of consequence to your question.
Okay. So if an alien, okay, first of all, I don't see a justification for that, and second of all, that seems extremely silly. So if an alien, tweaks your brain, and the alien is tweaking with your brain to make it so that you think that you made a novel testable prediction based on the hypothesis that there's a round square in your pocket, you think that it's subsequently reasonable for you to believe that there's a round square in your pocket?
Yes, you can have false beliefs and it be justified. There can be justified false beliefs. This is a thing. This is uncontroversial in JTB.
Yeah. No,
it seems like you just don't know basic philosophy. So like the American Indians, when Columbus went to America, he said that in 2 weeks, the sun will be blocked by my God because you've angered me because you didn't give me food.
Look, I agree.
Were they justified in believing that Columbus's God did that?
Yes, I agree that you can have justified.
Solved.
Yes, I agree that you can have justified false beliefs. My claim is that if you know that aliens were messing with your brain,
I didn't say
right?
I know that aliens, so it's a straw man. It's irrelevant to the hypothesis.
Okay. So you don't
anything I said. My analogy was exactly the same as the American.
So you don't know that the aliens were messing with your brain.
It's literally the same as the American Indian example. You can just go with that because that proves the point, which you just agreed to.
Okay. Well, I think there's a difference between believing in a round square, which you should think almost certainly isn't true. But so can you explain to me why is it that if you have the memory of making a novel testable prediction on hypothesis X, that you ought to believe that hypothesis X is true? I get why if you know that you actually did make the novel testable prediction, and of course I don't accept that, but why that would make it more reasonable. But if you merely have the memory, unless you have some reason to think your memory is veridical, why in the world does that make it reasonable for you to believe hypothesis X?
What a stupid question. Like literally what a just insanely stupid question. If the best basis of evidence you have, your memories, concludes that you have a reason to believe some hypothesis based off of the best methodology you have, are you rational to justify? Yes, you moron. Literally, you're asking moronic questions that have literally nothing to do with the questions. These are meta questions that are just irrelevant.
They're not meta questions because you are appealing to your epistemology to say that there isn't evidence for God, and I'm saying that I don't think your epistemology is very plausible. Right, but so you've just asserted
You've done nothing to demonstrate. So let's go back to just the very basics. If we have a prior probabilities or testimony or a conceptual claim that they have magic, miracles, mythical creatures, unicorns, my epistemology says that's garbage. Give me empirical evidence with novel predictions, or you're done. That methodology is accepted by every scientific field. Yours is just garbage. Now, I don't care about the linguistic games you want to play. It doesn't matter. I've won that. It's over. You're done. You don't get to say, oh, but my prior probabilities. I don't care. Novel predictions are a better justifier for belief than your prior probability garbage. Now, I don't care if you want to bring in brain in the vat matrix solipsism garbage. That applies to both hypotheses. It's just irrelevant. The evidence I provided in the context of the debate, testimony, including or conceptual evidence in this case, which would include prior probabilities, testimony, or anything that people imagine, is not justifiable to believe in things that don't have an empirical basis, like mythical sky daddies and magic. Now, that's a very clear, very concise argument that makes a lot of sense. And your counter argument was solipsism, which I don't care about. Okay, that's garbage. And prior probabilities.
So what you're suggesting that it's not reasonable to believe on some hypothesis unless it makes novel testable predictions or we have an empirical basis for it.
Sure.
Now, I was saying that I think if that's right, then we wouldn't believe in Julius Caesar. We went down that route. I don't think you give a remotely persuasive response to that. And I think
so Julius Caesar is made of all of the parts of Julius Caesar are empirical things. So he has an empirical basis. So I don't understand how you don't understand that is a complete. So
it's true that atoms have an empirical basis. But atoms composing Julius Caesar, we haven't made any novel testable predictions.
I don't care. That's good enough. If you want to say God is made of atoms, I'd say God is justifiable too. Is God made of atoms?
I don't think God's made of atoms.
No, God is not made of atoms. So how is this in any way remotely relevant to the conversation? Because the only requirement I've set forth is that you need to be composed of things that have an empirical basis. And then that's good enough. Now, there's obviously going to be more criteria beyond that, because I could say there's aliens or something that was composed that came down in history or whatever. I don't care. But that would still be better than Magic Sky Daddy God, who is not composed of things that have an empirical basis. So the criteria I set is just like the minimum level of criteria to be rational to believe based off of conceptual evidence priors or something.
So I don't see a reason to accept that we need to have the empirical basis for the things that compose the thing, right? So, for example, with dark matter. Now, it's true that dark matter did make some novel testable predictions, but I think even if it hadn't, just because it explains so well the facts about the universe, like the behavior, the strange way that gravity behaves, the different rotation of planets, even if we hadn't made those predictions in advance, but had discovered them and then later formulated the dark matter hypothesis, I think most scientists would join me in this, that dark matter would be reasonable to believe in, because even though we, by definition, don't know what dark matter is made of, we would still be confident that it exists by observing its effects.
So if you were just saying there is a thing that we know nothing about that is causing the creation of the universe or something, I'm okay with that. But you're applying properties into it. You're saying, but unanalogous to the dark matter example, which we literally don't claim to know what it is at all. We're just saying there is this thing we don't know about, which causes this observable phenomenon.
Right. Okay. Now, but you were suggesting that it's unreasonable to believe in something if we don't understand, if we don't have empirical evidence for the things that compose it. And so I was disagreeing with that in giving the dark matter example. Now, it may be
your disagreement doesn't work. What your disagreement doesn't work. So if we said magic pixies cause dark matter, that would be stupid, right? You would agree that's stupid.
Right, but I think that would be stupid because there isn't evidence that favors the magic pixie hypothesis.
I don't care why you think it's stupid. You have a terrible epistemology. The point here is that if you apply properties to the cause of dark matter, that's unjustified. Now, if you're just saying there is something we don't know about causing this, 100% agree, rational, reasonable. That's all dark matter is. Dark matter is the claim there is something causing this phenomenon. That's it. If that's the only claim you were making about God, I would say that's reasonable, but you're not. You're making additional claims. You're making the magic farting pixie claims causing dark matter because you're adding property. You're saying he's outside of space-time. He's perfect oneness, simplicity,
I
he's
haven't.
infinite power. All of this garbage you've added into the hypothesis, which makes it not analogous to dark matter. In the case of dark matter, I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, I don't know what's causing that, but something is causing that. 100%.
But so you're pointing to differences between dark matter and God. And I agree, there are lots of differences between dark matter and God. I'm obviously much more confident that dark matter exists than that God exists. But what you were saying earlier was that it's only reasonable to believe in something if the thing makes novel testable predictions or is composed of things that make novel testable predictions.
That is correct. So wait. That's what I was addressing here. So I was saying that in the case of dark matter, if you add something new, like if you said, I believe in dark matter and it's made of something that doesn't have an empirical prediction, that would be stupid. Nobody does that. When people say they believe in dark matter, they're just saying, I don't know what's causing that.
Okay, so which premise do you object to? It's reasonable to believe that dark matter exists. Do you agree with that?
No. Yes. Agree.
Yes. Okay. Yes, you agree with that. Just to be clear, right?
Agree. Yes.
Okay. And dark matter is not composed of things that have an implicit empirical basis.
That part I disagree with. Nobody has said that.
So you think that dark matter is composed of something that has an implicit empirical basis?
Nobody has said that either. We don't have a statement. Dark matter is just an unknown. It's like we don't know what this is. That's all it is. We don't know.
But then, okay, but if you say, okay, then I can say the same thing about God. God has an unknown. Yeah, God has an unknown basis. Okay, so if I say God has an unknown essence, right? So we know that God made the world. Then you're fine with the argument for God. You don't think your epistemology rules it out?
Right. So if all you're claiming is that stuff exists and something which I'm going to label God, which has all unknown properties.
Why doesn't? Well, dark matter doesn't have all unknown properties.
It does. Literally all of them are unknown. Literally
no,
all of them.
For instance, we know that it exerts a gravitational field.
No.
Then what do you think the predictions based on dark matter were based off? If not,
so a lot of the predictions of dark matter say that it's just nothing changes about the current physics. There's just there's nothing new there. It's just a glitch in the calculations. We have to modify the calculations. So if you modify general relativity, problem solved. So there isn't actually any dark matter. There's no additional thing there. So dark matter doesn't have any properties to it. There's a phenomenon. We're trying to explain the phenomenon, but there's no entailed properties to it whatsoever. Any of the hypotheses that explain dark matter don't entail adding any.
Well, those other hypotheses are not actually dark matter hypotheses. Those other hypotheses. Sorry, what?
Yes, they are. Dark matter isn't a label for a thing. Dark matter is there's a phenomenon. We don't know what's causing it. There's no actual.
Wait, okay. So one theory is called the Mond theory, and the Mond theory is the idea that if we modify the theory of gravity, that'll explain the anomalies that people use to invoke dark matter. Your view, you think that that's just a version of dark matter rather than an alternative to dark matter? Thing, or that so for instance, if you just Google Mond theory dark matter, the first thing that pops up is a Science Direct article, the first line of which is, in Mond, there is no notion of dark matter.
How does this relate to the topic?
Well, you were suggesting that the only thing that it's reasonable to believe in are that when we say that
so there are no entailed properties of dark matter. It does not require any properties.
Okay, so it's you don't think that dark matter
unknown for a phenomenon. If Mond is correct, that fully explains the dark matter hypothesis. That is, dark matter is just this unknown glitch in the thing. That would be dark matter.
So you think that the dark matter is just that Mond is just a version of the dark matter hypothesis?
Every physicist is going to agree with me on this.
Every physicist? Find me one.
Stop talking. If Mond is the correct explanation of dark matter, then yes, Mond is dark matter. That is it. Problem solved. You're done. Now, bring this back to your silly God hypothesis. There are no required properties to dark matter. None. It is rational to believe that there is something causing this. And it's rational to believe it's caused by properties that we know about. Things like or whatever, because those have an empirical basis. They're made of things. They all have an empirical basis. It is not rational to believe dark matter is made of magic farting pixies or an invisible sky daddy that's outside of space-time. So to actually bring this to the argument, how does your sky daddy who is outside of space-time in any way analogous to believing dark matter, which all of the hypotheses are only combinations of things that have an empirical basis and are just unknowns? They all fit. Every single model of dark matter fits into the two categories I gave: combinations of empirical stuff, and that nothing that has new properties that have not been empirically demonstrated. None of them. Not a single one.
Yeah. Well, so everything you just said is false. You suggested that any theory that's used to explain the things dark matter explains is a dark matter theory. That is not true. If you Google,
Okay, stop wasting my time, you dumbass. The point of the argument, Steelman the argument, you dumbass. The point of the argument here is that the only rational conclusion is to believe things that have an empirical basis and don't add any things that have no empirical basis. Literally all of physics can only do that. You're literally not allowed to do that. Add garbage like magic fairies or God or prime movers in physics. You can't, because physics is just derivative equations. So all of physics follows this argument. You're using the physics argument. Guess what? It follows my model. Bring this back to your silly God and show how any of the explanations for dark matter are analogous to making up silly properties of your silly sky daddy.
okay, so the way that
If you waste my time on trying to debate the definitions of Mond, I'm just going to mute you. Go back to your argument. So
you
my
often
argument
mute people when you
yes,
when you're sort of refuted on a point, and
nope, I mute people when they're wasting my time, when they're strawmanning, and when they're not addressing the actual argument, the Steelman position. The argument is, it is not rational to believe anything that doesn't have an empirical basis or is a combination of things that have an empirical basis. Every version of dark matter fits both of those definitions. So your analogy has been debunked.
okay, so in both the case of dark matter,
Don't
and
bring
the
up
case,
just how does this relate to your sky daddy?
well, I was about to explain. In both
Okay,
the
my
case
apologies.
of
My apologies.
in both the case of dark matter and the case of God, there's something that we believe in, and we believe in it because we say it has particular properties, and it explains facts about the world, even though we have not made even in cases where we haven't made novel testable predictions on the hypothesis that it is true. So in the case of God, we use God to explain fine tuning. We use God to explain nomological harmony, psychophysical harmony, the existence of laws, the existence of a physical universe. It's the simple hypothesis that nicely explains all these things. In the case of dark matter, what we posit is that there is invisible matter that we cannot see that populates galaxies and that has new properties that we don't know about, that does not reflect light, but that nonetheless has a gravitational field like normal matter. And then that makes that explains huge numbers of otherwise surprising facts about, for example, the rotation of galaxies, the way that celestial bodies interact, the way that galaxies interact when they interact with each other. Now, so in both cases, it's a theory, and it explains some fact about the world. Now, you were suggesting, well, but when we say dark matter, we don't know anything about the world. Now, I don't really care how you want to use the term dark matter. Right. My point is that we have good justification for believing that there's some kind of invisible matter that exerts a gravitational field. That is widely accepted among physicists. If you want to talk about the consensus among physicists, there are alternative theories that are fairly widely rejected. Now, obviously, I'm not a physicist. I don't know if it's correct, but I think it's at least reasonable to believe things on the basis of consensus among physicists. And so my claim is that the reason why it's reasonable to believe that God exists is similar to the reason why it's reasonable to believe that dark matter exists. In both cases, we posit something with certain properties, and then that explains facts about our world that are otherwise improbable.
And how do you relate this to your God? Because everything in dark matter has a combination of empirically demonstrated stuff. There is baryonic dark matter. It doesn't, like brown dwarfs. Not an
Wait,
issue.
can you explain what you mean by baryonic dark matter?
Normal matter stuff that we know about that has an empirical basis. Like,
wait, okay. So baryonic
baryons.
Okay, so baryonic dark matter, if I just Google it, so it's a version according to which baryons can compose dark matter. But the difference between dark matter and normal matter is that normal matter emits light, so we can see it, and baryonic dark matter doesn't, right? So the idea is not that it's the same
Looks
thing
like there are
as-
both baryonic and non-baryonic types of dark matter. Some dark matter may be composed of regular matter, i.e. baryonic, but simply not give off much light. NASA, imaginetheuniverse.gov. So you're wrong. Stop wasting my time. This is not controversial in physics whatsoever. Nobody in physics is positing anything that doesn't have an empirical basis.
What thing are you saying is not controversial in physics?
That you are not allowed to posit things that don't have an empirical basis. So my argument, remember the whole thing that you're only rational to believe things that have an empirical basis. Every single property in physics is one of those things. It's a combination of those things.
Yeah.
There's the demonstrated ones and the hypothetical ones, which are all combinations of things that have been empirically demonstrated.
Right. So I was giving a counterexample to that, which is dark matter. Now you're getting very frustrated
Literally,
about that.
it's not, because I've been trying to explain it. It's not. Nothing in physics is a counterexample to that. All of the dark matter is combinations of physical stuff that has been demonstrated to exist. All of it.
Right. So you're repeating that, right? But so the dark matter theory is.
I'm tired of this. I'm gonna mute you every time you bring it up. This part's debunked. Move on. Everything in physics. Nobody is allowed to posit magic, miracles, mythical creatures, supernatural sky daddies. Your analogy fails. Move on.
So how in the world do you expect this to be a reasonable debate? If you say nothing
I don't care if it's a reasonable debate. I want to engage.
If you say.
I don't care if it's a reasonable debate. My time is worth more than me than to give you an equal chance. I don't care. I want an interesting argument, and you're not giving me one. So don't waste my time on it. Move on.
If you say that nothing in physics has some property.
Nothing in physics is any combination of things. Literally, it's just a fact of physics. Move on, or I'm going to kick you.
Well, I mean, let's see. Do I value not being kicked more than I value making the point? I mean, look, if you say that there are no counterexamples and then mute me every time I give the counterexample, then that's unreasonable, and then you won't hear the counterexample.
I've addressed the point. I've won the point. Move on. Try to address the topic of why you think fine-tuning isn't as expected under naturalism as theism.
Well, your epistemology that rules out there being a god is correct. Now turn that your epistemology.
Wait. Go back to how do you show that the laws of physics are more likely under a god hypothesis than under an atheist hypothesis?
Okay, so if there's a perfect being that wants to create conscious agents, it explains why all the stars would align so that you get conscious agents, which includes predicting that there would be laws, physical stuff, the laws would apply to the physical stuff, they would produce complicated structures, you'd get finely tuned constant, physical arrangements would give rise to consciousness, those physical arrangements would arise, and there would be harmonious psychophysical states that correlate with the physical.
Okay, so my argument was that is a particular version of theism. You have selected one of infinitely many possible ways theism could be. It has a particular nature to prioritize a particular outcome. You could do the same thing under naturalism and say I make up a particular version of naturalism that has a nature such that it would, like a law or something in its nature, that would force it to create the universe as we see it. And I can do this for any particular way the universe could be, both under the God hypothesis and under the naturalism hypothesis, and give it any particular nature I want to give any kind of universe outcome I want. And so the probabilities comparing a particular kind of theism to a particular kind of atheism are the same, and the probabilities comparing a general kind of theism and a general kind of atheism are the same. Right. So there's no advantage.
Yeah, so I don't think that's right, because whether that's right will depend on what the probability is, conditional on there being a designer of some sort, that there would be a designer who's disposed to create conscious agents. My claim is that the probability of that is pretty high for two reasons. First, the simplest kind of God is a God without limits, so an unlimited mind who knows everything and is unlimited in power. And then if there's a mind that's unlimited in knowledge and power, it would know all the moral facts, and then it would be disposed to follow the moral facts, because recognizing that something is desirable, as Robin Collins suggested in your debate with him, knowing that something is desirable gives you a disposition to pursue it, absent a contrary inclination. Second of all, I think that it makes sense. There's something desirable about minds, right? There's something desirable about bringing about agents. And so as long as the probability of an agent wanting to make other good stuff is not terribly low, which it's not, a lot of agents seem to want to create good stuff, and the good is by its nature desirable, so it's at least not super unlikely that an agent would make it. If that's right, then the probability that there would be that if there's an agent, it would want to make a finely tuned universe isn't super low, while the probability, because a naturalistic, an atheistic universe is consistent with all the different laws, the probability that you get the finely tuned one is absurdly low.
I go back to the first one you said. The simplest definition of a mind is one that's unlimited. That seems
I said
stupid.
the simplest kind of mind is one that's unlimited.
That seems stupid. That seems like the simplest kind of, I don't know, factory is one that has infinite parts. That seems incredibly stupid.
Well, it's not about having infinite parts. The idea is that if there exists some fundamental property like a mind, the simplest version of that will be something that has the fundamental property in an unlimited way, right? So, for instance, if you're considering the hypothesis that the modal realist hypothesis that every possible world exists is way more likely than the hypothesis that there are exactly 98,000 possible worlds, just a random haphazard array of them, because it's simpler to just say they all exist, or that the modal facts exist are fully instantiated without limit, than it is to say that there is some limit. So it's very easy to specify. In contrast, other minds, you have to build in very specific ways the particular set of desires, the particular set of powers, and so on that it has.
All right, so go back and try to explain this of how, let's say, there's a quantum field. Familiar with Boltzmann brains?
Yes.
So Boltzmann brain is just a brain that pops into existence from a quantum field or something of any kind. And so let's say, what would be more likely, a Boltzmann brain that pops into existence that's unlimited, or a Boltzmann brain that's of a fly?
Oh, a Boltzmann brain of a fly would be more likely, but that's because if a Boltzmann brain arises from a particular physical process, and so it's similar to say that there are fewer parts that come together rather than more parts. So I agree that if you thought that God was composed of lots of different parts, then a theory on which there's a simpler God composed of fewer parts would be likelier than one where he was composed of parts. But the God hypothesis is that there's a God who doesn't have any parts, who's just this mind fully without limits, undivided, uncomposed, undifferentiated, pure, just unlimited mind. Now, I agree that'll be a problem if you're a physicalist. But first of all you need to get it to have a high prior is that the probability of it is...
There's a follow-up question there. So, why would it be in the case of saying...
Sorry, you cut out. I just didn't hear the last sentence.
Yeah, so why would it be the case in, say, the fundamental nature of reality that we prefer a mind as you define it that is unlimited, which seems like an oxymoron?
The reason